that started a long journey, that I went through with getting a lot of help, a lot of support, a lot of therapy, and eventually got to a place where I, was able to begin that whole process of looking at myself, processing a lot of deep thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and moving more into self-acceptance and self-love. Not an easy process. There were a lot of dark times during that period of time, and that is why the book also focuses on the mental health component. But what inspired me to write the book was a couple of things. When I went to my very first therapist when I was leaving my position at the church, he had said, after talking with me, he said, "Someday you're going to write a book." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about that." And he said, "No." He said, I really think you are." And then he became one of several others who shared that same sentiment. So it was interesting because I think that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. But at the same time, when I was going through this, I was, desperate for help and desperate for encouragement and for resources. And so I, looked everywhere I could find and looked for books, looked for podcasts, friends, connections, and I didn't. While I found some, I didn't necessarily find ones that totally resonated with me, particularly in the three areas that I'm addressing in my book. So that was my real inspiration. Was I wanted to put this out there, not only as sharing my story, but even more importantly, for it to be an inspiration for others, that they could find hope. That yes, I can keep going. There are answers and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Welcome to Beyond Better, a podcast that explores a simple but profound idea. We all deserve to live lives we love, and that includes our work lives too. I'm your host, Stacey Ennis, an author, book coach, speaker, and long-time location-independent entrepreneur living in Portugal with my family of 4. Join me as I talk business, location independence, writing, publishing, and so much more, all focused on building a life that is beyond better. Welcome. I'm really excited this week to get to share an author conversation with you. We are going to talk about a journey from pastor to marketing executive. We'll get to learn from this guest how he overcame a crisis of faith and found his way into self-love and self-acceptance. We're going to talk about mental health, sexuality, so many things in today's episode. And because we have an author here, we also get to learn from him about his author journey, because it's so fun to talk about and it's such a joyful thing to get to dig into with authors. So let me introduce you to this week's guest. Kevin Hutchison is a marketing professional and former pastor whose talent and expertise have been leveraged in both profit and not-for-profit organizations. He has worked for national and global agencies, held tenure in communications with a Midwestern megachurch, and has served on boards such as the American Marketing Association and Respect, an education and theater-based anti-bullying nonprofit. Kevin, welcome. I'm so excited to get to talk with you today.
Thank you, Stacey. It is an honor to be here. I'm really excited about it.
Your story is one of self-rejection to self-love, and you went through a lot throughout that journey. I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more, give them kind of the overview of what you went through and what inspired you to share your story through your new book, which just came out, Alchemy from Ashes.
Absolutely. It's been a long journey for me, culminating in what's happening right now and in the authorship of this book. But 50 years or more. And when I look back on it, so much has happened, and it has been a journey of learning. Eventually getting to a place of more self-love and self-acceptance, which I'm still working on. But looking back at that, it's woven all the way into my childhood through adulthood. I think where it's interesting, I was always drawn to the creative arts. And so being involved in theater and in writing and things like that, self-expression. But then also I had this desire to serve. And it was interesting when someone asked me when I was a child, what do you want to do when you grow up? One of the things I would say is, I want to be a pastor. Well, that was because one of my neighbors, they were a pastoral family, and they showed me more love and acceptance and family than I had experienced in a long time. And so I looked very positively at that experience. Those components, were all very important as I started to move through my journey of life. But I always knew that there was something that was a little different, about me. And I said I was more of a creative soul as well, a little more sensitive. And but I wasn't quite sure what it was, and it wasn't until I was in my late teens that I realized, from a sexuality standpoint, that something else was going on, but didn't really know enough to come out at that time or embrace that, and so thought that was something that would pass, and so I entered into a marriage, but then eventually shared my struggle with my sexuality with my wife at the time, and then we were a part of a more traditional conservative church and faith movement at that time, and so really embraced that, and wanted to stay in my marriage, and have a more traditional marriage and stay in that traditional church. But eventually, over time, that became a lot, and there was a lot that was being pushed down, mentally, emotionally, and so it eventually got to a boiling point where that did come out, and that was after being a pastor. While I was working, in a very large church, I was involved in communications and marketing, which is a part of what I have done now for many years as a part of my career. But also during that time, I was a part of leading a ministry that focused on individuals like myself who were intent on trying to stay in the church, but not necessarily live out their full sexuality at the time. And so I didn't believe people could change, but was trying to live within those constraints that we thought that God wanted us to. So all of that to say that eventually, as I said, that became a lot to deal with from a mental health standpoint. Eventually put me in a faith crisis standpoint of who is God? What does he think about all of this? How do I reconcile all of this? And then of course the sexuality component of that. So that started a long journey, that I went through with getting a lot of help, a lot of support, a lot of therapy, and eventually got to a place where I was able to begin that whole process of looking at myself, processing a lot of deep thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and moving more into self-acceptance and self-love. Not an easy process. There were a lot of dark times during that period of time, and that is why the book also focuses on the mental health component. But what inspired me to write the book was a couple of things. When I went to my very first therapist when I was leaving my position at the church, he had said, after talking with me, he said, "Someday you're going to write a book." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about that." And he said, "No." He said, "I really think you are." And then he became one of several others who shared that same sentiment. So it was interesting because I think that kind of stuck in the back of my mind. But at the same time, when I was going through this, I was, desperate for help and desperate for encouragement and for resources. And so I, looked everywhere I could find and looked for books, looked for podcasts, friends, connections, and I didn't. While I found some, I didn't necessarily find ones that totally resonated with me, particularly in the three areas that I'm addressing in my book. So that was my real inspiration. Was I wanted to put this out there, not only as sharing my story, but even more importantly, for it to be an inspiration for others, that they could find hope. That yes, I can keep going. That there are answers and there's light at the end of the tunnel, and not to give up. And so that was a very important piece for me. The other piece of it, Stacy, is my hope is that I believe, really, really strongly believe, that God puts people in our paths, things in our paths that, if we're aware and we see them, that there's messages for us and there's encouragement and that there's love. And so my hope is that in addition, that other people who read this book that are, maybe they're a family member or a friend or a spouse or a partner, significant other, someone that you know that may be wrestling in one of these areas, that you can see the important role that you can play in someone's life in giving them encouragement and hope.
I love so much about all of what you just said. I will come back to the book journey later, but I want to go back a little bit to talk about the faith harm, because for me, I grew up in a Protestant Christian school and community. So that was my upbringing, and also had a lot of harm from my faith growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And also the area that I grew up in was about 40% LDS. So my school was probably in that range of Mormon population. So also witnessed a lot of people who identified as gay being sent away to reform. Like this was, I knew people that did that, and also had a lot of friends that grew up to realize the amount of harm that was done to them through their faith environments. And of course, you navigate through that as you grow and you learn what your spiritual path should look like, or at least you try to. I feel like I'm still on that journey personally to kind of understand how faith fits into my life exactly, and what I believe and what I don't believe.
Yeah.
But certainly that unpacking of that, the pain
Mm-hmm.
and the harm, um, is quite a journey for people. And there's also the challenge to that layered on, is that you're often still in the fishbowl. So you don't often even have the perspective to step back and really recognize what's happening. I remember years ago, somebody started a Facebook group for people from my community who had been harmed by the community. And it just like exploded. Like people just joined and kept sharing all of these stories. And I think that really helped, because other people were like, oh, you mean that happened to you too? And that wasn't okay. It was like this kind
Yes.
of shared awareness around it. I guess what I'm getting to with this, for anybody listening who has experienced that or is going through that, or maybe even has their interest peaked of like, oh, maybe I did, maybe that's actually playing into my life in a way I didn't recognize. What are some of the things that I know you mentioned therapy? What really helped you get through that and continue to unpack that?
Yes, and that's a good question. For me, Stacy, going back like in my life, I always had from the time I was a young boy, I had this like strong belief in God. Like I just thought there is something bigger than myself at work, and just always had that really strong underlying belief. Um, and so that stuck with me through all of this deep inside. But while there were a lot of things that happened, like yourself, there were, like you mentioned yourself, there were, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of rejection. And so many people that I know, particularly in the LGBTQ plus community, when that happens, I know a lot of people who just not only recoil, but have completely separated themselves or decided that a faith community is not for them, or faith is not for them,
Hmm.
because of the woundedness that happens. And I can see how that happens. And I went through a period of time where I really pulled back as well, and hid, hibernated, whatever you want to call it, and became, very angry and and almost bitter about the faith community and the way I was treated, and comments people would make, and not being, well, in some communities you would be welcomed but not accepted, and there's a
Hmm.
difference between being welcomed and not accepted. So what began to change for me is I kept thinking, um, I knew that because of the people that were placed in my life, and that's part of the things that I talk about in the book, is there are these guides, there are angels, there are signs along the way, and I really believe that those were from a force that's much greater than myself. So really solidified that belief. And yet I kept thinking, somewhere there's got to be a place, that is inclusive, and where there's a loving faith community, because this is the thing for me was separating who I saw God to be, who God was in my life, versus the people that are representing that deity in the universe. And that's the hard one, because the people are the ones that hurt us because they do it in the name of a power greater than themselves. Um, so what really was a turning point for me was when my partner and I went to visit a faith community here in our city that we hadn't been to before, and they had an interim pastor from the East Coast. She was very vibrant and just incredible, and I talk a little bit about her in the book because of this. And she was so genuine and authentic. And after the church service, we were walking out, and she was at the door greeting everyone. And she said, "Oh, I've never seen you before. You must be visitors." And we said, "Yes, we are." She said, "I'd love to have coffee with you." And took her card. And when we walked out, I said to my partner, I said, "You know what? She probably says that to everybody. She doesn't want to have coffee with us." I had a very jaded attitude about it. But after a few weeks, I reached out to her. She responded immediately. We ended up at Starbucks on a Saturday. She spent 3 hours talking to us. She has a son who's gay. She had just it's hard to put into words the love, acceptance, and deep theological understanding that she had. And so that was the beginning of a turning point for me that brought me back to a place where I wanted to be in a faith community. I didn't really ever lose my belief that there was something at work greater than myself, but I did lose my belief in the people within the faith community. So
I think it's, that finding a place where you feel truly welcomed and accepted is
yes,
is so powerful. And it's something I've been thinking about too in my own life, because as much as there was harm by the faith community that I was raised in, there was also a real sense of community. I had friends. We had a place that I would go every week. There was summer camp. There were all the things that you would go every week and you would see people that you
mhm,
know. And there is that sense of community. I was just thinking about that last week and how I would love to have something like that in my life, just a place where you regularly see the same people, you catch up, your families know what's going on with each other. You have this place that is, of course we have community here and lots of friends and things like that, but it's very different than
yeah,
having a place you go where everybody gathers in community around. And I think also ideally you have shared values, you have
right.
a shared mindset, hopefully good people. Um, and I think that that's a really powerful thing in a person's life.
It is. It really is, and it's hard to articulate how meaningful it is. But and not to jump ahead to the book launch, but in talking about the faith community, that was a really interesting and beautiful component for me. Was when I was talking about where to hold my book launch, the church offered the church that we go to is beautiful. They call it the Rotunda, is their big lobby area. That's just a beautiful, beautiful event space. And they said you should have it here. And this to have that community, the pastors, everyone embrace that, promote it, support it, and celebrate. It's like it all came full circle for me. It really did.
Can you tell me more about that moment, Kevin? Because I think, I know there are a lot of aspiring authors listening to this podcast, maybe some that are further along in their journey, some that are just thinking about it. And I love that you had a big, huge party to celebrate. I know you had a choir there and all kinds of cool stuff. So, can you tell us about that experience and what that was like for you? Walking into that space, setting up, welcoming people. Tell me what that was like.
It really was a magical day, and I wasn't even prepared for the magnitude of how it was going to impact me emotionally or spiritually even. And so, yeah, it just started, with the planning and, sending out invites to people in, my circle and network. And then the church really jumped on board because we had talked about it. I said, well, I wondered, could you include it in the announcements? And they came back and said, well, we're not just going to include it in the announcements. We're going to promote it. Like it's going to be one of our events. And so they just took it and ran with it and promoted
Wow.
all forms of social media. And people were teasing me because they have a big electronic billboard outside the church it's on a very, one of the main roads here. And they're like, your face kept popping up on there with your book title.
Oh my gosh. Did you get a picture of that? Of
I
the
did.
billboard?
I have to. One of my friends did, so I have to get one from them.
Oh my, that's so good.
So they really promoted it as well, and then pushed it out on social media and on my website and all of that. But really didn't know quite what to expect, and then ended up with about 125 people is what we're estimating came. But it was a beautiful mix of people from like where I work now, from friends, current friends, past friends, people I used to work with, even people I used to work with 10, 15, 20 years ago. There were people that I would have never anticipated would have come, and they did. And so it was a beautiful time of connecting. That my only regret is that I wish I would have had more time with everyone. But walking into the space and having I have a launch team that worked with me, and they are just the most incredible, beautiful group of people. And they just they came in and took care of everything. I mean, it
Wow.
looked absolutely beautiful. And a dear friend who is on the launch team, and she was also a beta reader, and she works for the community playhouse here as well. She insisted she's like, I want to do the centerpieces for the event. And I said, oh, great. And so she made 10 or 12 of these gorgeous centerpieces, and they're made out of books and flowers. And I mean, they were works of art. They were absolutely.
Wow.
People comment, they're like, "Oh my gosh, these are so gorgeous. Where did you get them?" And like they were like handcrafted with love by this dear friend, which
Wow.
made it even more meaningful. So having all of that was just very, very special. And then the choir that came, it's the River City Mixed Choir. It's their ensemble group called River's Edge, and they're a part of the LGBTQ plus choir here in Omaha, and they have it's a I mean they're nationally recognized. They're incredible. The choir's 200 people, and then this group was a group of about I think they were about 12 to 15, somewhere in there. And I wanted them to come because they were a part of my journey early on when I was really struggling and not knowing how to reach out and who to reach out to. And so I decided I didn't know anyone to ask, and they were having a concert at our concert venue here in town. And so I ended up buying a ticket, going alone, sneaking in the door, going up to the balcony, and they did that particular performance. It was probably close to 10 years ago now. Was called Trevor's Suite, and it was about Trevor from the Trevor Project. And it was a musical dedicated to his story, and then his mother was there and spoke. And I sat in the balcony and cried the whole time because I had never experienced like such the power of the music and the words and the connection and the community that I could tell everyone shared there. Really, really touched my heart. So the choir was extremely meaningful to me. So having them come there and be a part was very special. And then they sang three songs, and one of the songs they sang is I Have a Voice. And if you've heard that, the words of it are so powerful. I actually just have one verse I will share really quickly with you because
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
I love it. So it is, I have a voice, simple and clear. It speaks the truth for all to hear. It gives me hope. It gives me faith. It lifts me up. It keeps me safe. And so that was the first verse. And when they sang that, just about everyone in the place was in tears. Just that it was
Wow.
a beauty. And I thought, for me, Stacy, that was one of those moments where I realized I have a voice, and the book is giving me a platform. And for one of the first times in my life, I feel like I'm owning it in a much bigger and more powerful way than I ever have before. And that was very scary, along the way. But being in that moment at that time, it felt right and beautiful, and so it was. Yeah, that event was just like a culmination of all of this coming together, and so it was a wonderful celebration. And then we did the book signing, and we were actually there for an hour later than the event when it was supposed to end, because people waited. People were so patient and waited in line for a long time to get a book, and I'm really, really grateful. So,
Wow, that just sounds completely dreamy. Like a dream experience. I'm so glad that you got to have that experience.
oh,
And and I think also knowing, when you talk about that finding your voice, I think that a lot of people think that having written, like people will say, I want to have written a book, essentially. Like that's what they want to do, just to kind of be done with it and have the book out and ready in the world. But actually, it's that process of writing and that journey of getting it out into the world, I think, that really helps you find that confidence, bring your voice fully forward, especially when you're writing about something so vulnerable and about things that maybe you weren't even sure if you wanted to share,
yes.
right?
Yes, that was one of my biggest obstacles, was fear along the way, because for that very reason, uh,
Yeah.
I would wake up at night, in a cold sweat sometimes, thinking, do I really, really want to do this? Or what am I doing? And my partner would always, he's really wonderful. And he would always say, he's like, Kevin, if you give one person 1 ounce of hope to keep going, it's worth it.
Mhm.
Don't stop. And then there were so many other people like that too. All the beta readers and other people that were involved gave me the same encouragement. But it is, you do question it, and I did a lot along the way. But I'm so grateful that I kept going.
Mm. I think that we also have a tendency in our brains to catastrophize the results of the thing that we're afraid of, right? So it's normal to feel, if I share this vulnerable thing that I haven't been sharing, like maybe it's not necessarily a secret per se, but it's not something I volunteer to share with everybody, right? It's maybe something that's more private.
Yeah,
And now I'm putting it in a book. It's normal. And I think it's also our like reptilian brain that's like, don't put yourself in front of you don't want to be in front of people. You want to be safe and keep
yeah,
yourself safe. And so that's normal. And then I think that also that the rumination and that can take you down this road of like catastrophizing what will happen when you actually share.
hmm,
I have yet to find an example of an author who was really compelled to share their story from a real place of service and regretted it. I haven't heard that yet. I'm sure that that exists somewhere out in the world, but in my world, I've never heard that happen.
yes,
And I think that it's um, I believe that a lot of that is because you are now living so authentically and into the message that you feel called to
mhm,
share. Like you, Kevin, have taken pain and you're living into purpose from that. You have taken what you learned and you are now offering something that can hopefully impact somebody's life. And
yeah.
that I feel like that is inherently what we're supposed to do as humans.
Hmm. Yep. No, I agree. It makes me think of Stacy. My one of my counselors always said, you need to get to a place where you're living joyous, happy, and free. And I thought, is that really ever possible? Will I ever really feel that way? And I have to say, I've thought about that at the event as well. As I thought, I've experienced joy so many places along the way with this in the last few months, but I experienced real joy, and that I thought, okay, now I know what she meant. Joyous, happy, and free.
That's a really good like life goal to be joyous, happy, and free. I love that as an anchor.
Hmm.
I would love to hear a little bit from you about creative perseverance,
Mm.
because I know that this is a project that took time and it really required you to keep going and keep at it. Um, and more often, what happens is authors put their books down and they say, I'm going to pick it back up in 3 months or 6 months. And they never, ever, ever pick that book up again. And it just collects digital dust, never makes it out into the world. But that did not happen with you. So I would love for you to share to the level you're willing about your own journey of um, really staying with it, keeping going to complete this and publish it.
For me, it was, I mean, it's been a little over 3 years from, from the time I started. And, I would say that, well, there's a couple of things. One being, starting the process with you, Stacy, as my coach was incredible. I mean, all the foundational elements were in place. I had a path, I had an outline, I had a process. I had a lot of really, really wonderful input to get me moving. So then when I got to the place of engaging with an editor, um, she was incredible. And that's the other place where then, you know, to your point, that's where I think it could be. And I had thoughts about, am I going to pause here? Because she was pressing me in some areas to go further and to go deeper and to share some things. Not that she didn't want me to be uncomfortable or share things I didn't want to, but she just had an intuitive sense that she's like, there's more. I know you have more. And so that well, that was challenging at times. It was also good, and it was a growth moment for me as as a person and as an author. And so that really helped as well. So and that helped me push through there. I think the other piece of that is really the conversations that then I would have with people regarding what the book was about, and then eventually when I got to the beta reader phase and had people, which I was looking at that. That's been almost a year ago that I had went through that part of the process, but getting the feedback from people about because I was so close to it that sometimes you think, oh, is this really good? Is this really going to make a difference? Is it really going to matter? Or is it too much? All of those questions. But going through that with that group, really, it reignited my fire to keep going. So I think that, through all of those different phases, there's opportunities to pause and put things on the shelf, like you said. But there, I feel like having the right people in the right place, the right team, just kept me going through the process. And then, of course, having the publishing coach that then once you're on that track, you're on a project management system of getting things. So there's not going to be any pausing. So the other thing I was just going to say real quickly was that that every time there was a pause, Stacy, the good thing about it was it made that made the book better because there being to go back and be reflective on it or look at feedback that someone might have given or even some thoughts I had myself. I'm grateful I had that period of time and that I didn't push it out sooner because I made significant changes to it that I think made it better and I think will create a deeper connection with the reader. Um, so yeah, so I'm grateful I didn't pause any longer than that, but I totally had those moments where I thought about it. I really did, but thank you for the people in the community and the author community as well that I've been a part of, because there are individuals in the community that I've talked to that that accountability and connection. I feel like it's just like going to a workout class. It's like if you don't have like-minded people around you cheering you on, pushing you on, that you're accountable to, it's hard to finish. So you've created something really beautiful with the author community and also the network of resources that we have. And to have the opportunity to work with global community of people, I just feel like I am so blessed. I mean, my world is better than it was 3 years ago. That's for sure.
I love that. Yeah, it is really it's so cool also to get to celebrate with people who are on the journey too.
Mhm.
Obviously it's so meaningful to celebrate with your normal community, but with people that are doing the same thing on the same path, I find that to be so cool and exciting and joyful. One of the things that I just want to pull out for listeners and highlight that I think that you did really well is that when you got toward the end or to the end of one stage, you organized the next stage. And so that really kept you moving. Where I see people um, fall apart or not reach their goal is because they don't get themselves set up for the next thing. And you did a really good job with that. And you also brought a lot of meaning to each stage. So I remember when you did your beta reader party, never heard of anybody doing that before. Love that so much. The photos that I saw from that, the intention, the heart you put behind that, really being your full self, being really present in each stage. 3 years is a reasonable amount of time to finish a book and get it to market. And you took the time that you needed to do it well and to feel really good about it and to not rush it. And I hope that you feel so proud of all that you've accomplished. It's really amazing, Kevin.
Oh, thank you. I do, and the publishing coach Katya, she had mentioned. She said you have the team that you assembled all around the way, all along the way, are they're A plus people, and she said that's what it takes in order to get it done and to do it right. And so I'm grateful to you, Stacy, for that, because during the course of our times together, you've shared a lot of those resources, and that's where those connections have come from. So I feel like my book today is where it is because of that. And the other thing I would just say about that is all of these people, I feel like they were so invested in it with me. It wasn't just people doing their job, somebody being an editor or someone being a proofreader, or that was the beautiful and magical thing about it. As I interviewed different people, connected with different people, the right people came across my path that there was a chemistry with, there was a connection with. I felt like they understood the message and the book, and they were bought into it. I mean, I saved some of the emails that I have gotten from some of the people I worked with. They like make me cry. They're just
Mm.
so beautiful, and so that makes it even more meaningful. I feel like when I was at the launch holding the book up, I thought, I feel like this book is a treasure because it's not just a book that's been produced and written and printed and designed by anyone. It's like everyone that has touched it, there's like deep meaning behind it. So it's like my baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, and it's beautiful for anybody on YouTube that can see this. It's just so well done, so just beautifully produced from cover through the pages to every little detail. So let me ask you one final question, and then I'll ask you the question I ask all of our listeners that's more podcast specific. But because you're a new author, you've just released your book, and we have a lot of aspiring authors that listen to this podcast. What advice would you offer somebody who is just starting this journey that's maybe they're in a similar position as you where they have a personal story that is new for sharing, like they haven't maybe shared this side of themselves before, but they feel very called. They feel like this is their next goodness that they're going to do in their life, like is sharing this story, but they feel it feels very vulnerable and they feel very uncertain. Um, what would you offer them?
I would say don't be afraid, because fear can kick in really early in the process. But the other big piece of that is not to minimize your story, because I think we all have a tendency to do that, as we think, oh, there's a million books or 10 million books out there, however many there are, and someone's surely written about this or had a story similar to mine. But reality is they don't. every one of us, our journeys are so unique and so different, and so special. And so that's what I would say to them as well. Your journey is very unique, very special, and to work with the right team of people to pull those particular elements out, um, is it's fun, and it's a wonderful hard process all at the same time. And so I would definitely encourage them in that. I would also encourage them to get in community, whether it's, locally. There's groups, within communities they can get together with, through Meetup or different things. But talking to other like-minded people, and then just starting to kind of bounce your story idea off of someone, and get some feedback, and get some encouragement to get the momentum going. And then, of course, get a coach. That's that,
Yes, I like
that's
that you added that.
that's number one. Seriously, that's number one.
That's really great advice, Kevin. Thank you so much. I hope that really helps a listener today. Okay, here's our standard guest question.
Okay.
If you could recommend one book to listeners, a book that has really profoundly impacted your life, what would it be?
And that is such a good question. And there are so many. And my first reaction when I read that was something from Brene Brown, because she's had such a profound impact on me, especially when dealing with shame and some of those elements. But as I think about it even more, the one that I would write that profoundly impacted me on my journey of writing, particularly when I was facing those moments of doubt and fear, was Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights.
I love that book. That's a good one. Did you listen or read?
I
Which,
listened to some, I read it, but then I did listen
okay.
to some of it
I
too.
listened to it. I listened to it. It was very
So
good.
good
Yeah.
on audio. It really, because it's his voice, and
Yeah.
his
And he's an actor. Yeah.
yes. So I just think, and for me, what it was, here's this, Academy Award winning man who's built this, incredible reputation. And he writes this very candid, raw memoir, a very meaningful story about, green lights, looking for those, in your life, and how to change yellow and red lights to green lights. I mean, there's so much good content in that book. But what it did for me was it helped me see that, like, okay, I can share some of these things. Like, there is a way to do that, and have impact and have meaning, and so that it really encouraged me in my journey, especially in the latter part of this. So I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it.
Great recommendation. I love that. I know that listeners can find out about your book, order your book at alchemyfromashes.com. We will be sure to drop that in the show notes of this episode, as well as your LinkedIn profile, so that listeners, and future readers can follow you there. Kevin, it has been such a delight talking with you. And I just have to offer my hugest congratulations on this incredible milestone, this beautiful book that you've written. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you for celebrating with me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to you, our listener, for being with us. If you have a moment right now to rate and review the podcast, I would be very, very grateful. It helps me reach more listeners with the message of living a life that is not just better, but beyond better. And I have to always say thank you to Rita Dominguez for her production of this podcast. She is the reason that you are watching or listening to it right now. I just had the opportunity to co-work with her in person here in the Algarve, and I got to see her working on the podcast, and she was laser focused, so focused on delivering quality. So huge, huge thank you to her. And I will be back with you before you know it.